to NCTV. This is Lew Sitzer, your host, and we're here today with Jorden Fisher-Smith, local author, retired park ranger, celebrated writer, who has recently written a book entitled Noir, a park ranger's patrol in the Sierras. So welcome, Jorden.
Well, thank you for having me on, Lew.
It's a great pleasure. I've gotten to know Jorden a little bit in the last week or so as we've been arranging this program, and I also had the pleasure of reading his book, which I heartily recommend. It's been praised and as a national bestseller. It has been described as a book creating a new genre of writing, a combination of combining nature writing and mystery. And it has been described as eloquently meditative, as well as by Newsweek. He writes with about the natural world with more grace than anyone since Edward Abbey. So we're here to discuss a little bit about everything, really. We've got a broad agenda. So let's see, a little bit of a bio. You have grown up in Northern California, attended college, and in the meantime got introduced to the Park Service, and then spent most of your adult life really working as a park ranger.
Yeah, I started out as a wilderness ranger for the Forest Service and firefighter in Idaho and Wyoming, and then went to the National Park Service, worked for the national parks in Sequoia Kings Canyon, and later on in Alaska at Lake Clark National Park and Preserve, off-the-road system in the bush in western Alaska, and then spent most of my career here on the west side of the Sierra, northern Sierra, on the American River, in this land that the government had acquired to build the Auburn Dam.
Right, and I was really impressed with the amount of training, the amount of preparedness you needed to be, not only to be a park ranger, a law enforcement officer, but mountain climber, rock climber, a lot of physical
yeah,
stress.
you know, Lew, I think this is probably one of the last generalist occupations in the world, you know, or certainly in America, other than maybe ranching, where somebody has to be able to fix, you know, engines, to be able to rappel off a cliff and save somebody who's fallen, to do you know, whitewater rafting, or run in some areas saltwater boats off rugged coastlines in heavy seas. It's a very diverse occupation depending on where it's practiced. Rangers who work in places like the Everglades or even Point Lobos are divers. Rangers who work on the northern parts of Alaska, for example, run dog teams, patrol with dog teams still, so it's a whole bundle of skills, and generally now many of the rangers hold these skills at the level of other people who do that one thing their whole lives. For example, you have ranger paramedics who do paramedic work as well as any paramedic who does only paramedic work, but they're also teaching about nature or something else.
One of the things that also I was surprised about is how many of the state parks with park rangers and recreation areas are now law enforcement officers. I'm wondering, how did that come about? Was it always the case?
It really was. I mean, you know, in Noir, I traced this history, my book Noir, I traced this history back to its beginnings. And from the very get-go, you have these miraculous projects, these parks, where somebody says, let's save these last stands of grand redwoods, or let's save this last remaining piece of coastline, or let's save something. And that's a counter trend to the general trend of humanity, which is really to change everything on Earth, you know, utterly. And we've certainly seen that in our time. And so those things in the beginning, for example, at Yosemite, which was a state park, in 1864, the federal government gave 20,000 acres of land in Yosemite Valley to the state of California, and the governor made a proclamation saying, this area is sacrosanct and thou shalt not do anything bad to it. And right away there was transgression. Some fellow went out in the middle of Yosemite Valley and built himself a hotel, saying it was his land, not the government's. And so by the mid to late 1860s, they had appointed a guardian, and that was his official title. The first ranger that we know of in the United States was called Guardian of Yosemite. And from the very get-go, he got involved in convincing people not to do the things that would damage the place. He made his first arrest once he got some sort of law enforcement authority from the California legislature. He made his first arrest in 1870 of two men who cut down a huge pine tree in the floor of Yosemite Valley, knowing full well that it was illegal. And that goes on in the history of national parks and state parks, that people have to be convinced, sometimes just by giving most of the time, by giving them a little information, by saying, here's why this place is special, and here's why you should help us preserve it. And sometimes by a stern lecture, and occasionally, there are people who really want to do harm to either the place or people in it. And that's where, the full sort of authority and danger kind of comes in.
And in your book, you detail quite a few of the incidents that happened to you in the process of protecting and securing, really.
Well, I hate to say it, but the hardest thing was to pick them out, because after all, these are really just a handful of the literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases that we went through there. And there were some that were far more hair-raising than the ones that are in Nature Noir, but they just didn't fit into the flow of the narrative. In a book, you have to serve the narrative of the book, and it has to be even. I didn't want to write a book of just a bunch of anecdotes. And there have been ranger books that are just a collection of anecdotes. I wanted Nature Noir to have an overall narrative arc, and so I had to only use those stories that would fit.
Well, perhaps we can take a look at Jorden at the American River. As I understand, you were responsible for 48 miles of the river canyon, approximately 42,000 acres. That's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, I was responsible, along with the handful of other rangers who worked there, for that land. And usually, at any given time, there were 2 to 4 of us on a given shift, and so that you divide up that 42,000 acres by 2, and you get, still a pretty big piece of ground.
So at some point, the river canyon became publicly secured and protected, but you had to essentially push people off that.
It was funny, because really the genesis of this strange state park called the Auburn State Recreation Area was the opposite of protection. This land had been acquired by the government for the express purpose of drowning it beneath the largest thin arch concrete dam at the time in the world. This thing was going to be 690 feet high, as high basically as the Hoover Dam, and 4 times as wide, this massive arch of concrete on the North Fork of the American below Auburn. You can still see the foundations of this dam by standing at the Auburn Dam overlook on Pacific Avenue in Auburn today. And this was to have created a pool of water that would have flooded about 48 to 50 miles up both forks of the river collectively. In other words, about 24 miles up each fork. It was a huge thing. And it only came into the sort of the purview of the park rangers, I think, through a historical accident. What happened was that the dam was delayed, and as the land, which had been acquired both from willing sellers and by condemnation, just sat there, people began to move back in and squat there. And the situation there got weirder and stranger as time went on. There were a lot of sort of, the price of gold went up, and gold miners moved in and began to establish claims and then dispute the claims with each other. A lot of people carried guns. There were a number of bad incidents involving gunplay. And eventually murder victims were found in the canyon. Stolen cars were pushed off the edge. And after an attempt to do law enforcement with the Federal Marshal's Service there, they brought in the park rangers, because the park rangers were supposed to have run the place as a recreational boating lake when it was finished. That was how people like me, who expected to spend their lives guarding the national treasures, ended up 400 or 600 feet beneath the waterline of a dam.
Mm. Well, perhaps we could go to take a look at the American River as we have it pictured, and come back to your book in just a bit.
Sure.
The Auburn Dam, of course, has been a huge controversy for as long as I can remember. Can you give us an update?
Well, what you're seeing in this picture is the North Fork the upper North Fork below the Colfax, Iowa Hill Road in the springtime. And as you can see, this is a very rugged canyon. What you're looking at is an area that would have been put underwater by this dam and might still be. This 42,000 acres roughly is still officially a dam site. The dam has never been officially decommissioned. And while it's not actively being built right now, it hasn't officially in any way been terminated. I think all it would take would be, you know, a 5-year drought in California, or what's worse, maybe a 10-year drought, and we'd be seeing this effort get started again. So this land lives in a kind of permanent state the way that a death row inmate lives when somebody, you know, who's been on death row for years gets stays of execution, and then they're marched down to the death chamber and the governor calls and they're unstrapped and taken back to their cell. That's the way this land has lived now for 40 years. And I think that was the thing that compelled me to write this book. It was such a strange situation for a park ranger to find himself in, to work in a place that was the exact opposite of the national and the state parks, in that, you know, those places have been selected by legislatures, the Congress, for example, to be saved for the American public forever. And this place had been selected by that same Congress to be drowned forever under this huge dam. And it just wasn't what I expected when I started park rangering.
And also, it seems to me that it still is controversial in the sense that many of our local representatives, our governmental representatives, are still rather in favor of the dam. And somehow, whether it's due to construction, engineering concerns, earthquake concerns, safety, that's been besides the environmental protection of the river, that seems to be a ongoing discussion as to...
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, our congressional delegation, and in some cases our supervisors here in the foothills, are responding to the desires and needs of the people who gave them money to get elected. And many of these people in this particular area are involved in the development industry and housing and, you know, light industrial and all kinds of other development. And in California, which has, you know, 6 months of the year sometimes without rain, development is all about water. And there's a limited amount of water available for, in the long run. It's a limited quantity. And so I think that they, of course, want to capture water running off the Sierra and make it available to those kind of developments.
Right. So talk to us a little bit about the actual process of why go into writing, why put this together, what was your motivation and process?
You know, that's such a great question, Lew. I remember that I started trying to write professionally and write for magazines because I had been a park ranger already for quite a few years. And in the late 80s, I realized that global climate change was a reality. I'd been reading about it. I'd been introduced to it as a concept when I was in college. And by the 80s, you know, when James Hansen of NASA stood up in front of a Senate subcommittee on global climate change and said, well, yeah, we think this thing is actually taking place and we're pretty sure it's caused by human beings. That got my attention because, of course, NASA isn't exactly a radical environmental organization. And, you know, I read more about it, and I realized that my whole project of standing on a piece of land with a gun and a badge and protecting it at all costs might fail if there was a generalized ecological collapse around my land. So I began to write with an intuition that I wanted to spread my protective impulse wider than just the parks that I was defending, and to use my perspective as a park ranger living with the things every day that people cared about, living with those great trees and the animals and so on, that I wanted to spread that perspective out into the world through writing. I think that's why I started. But I'll tell you that as writing developed for me, I became less of a polemicist, and my writing became less of an argument, and I became more and more interested in the idea of telling a story really well, and just letting people enjoy the story and letting them draw their own conclusions. And I think that's what I've tried to do in Nature Noir. Nature Noir has, you know, one rant in it, as you know, at the end of the chapter on whitewater rafting in the American River. But in general, I've practiced what my friend Utah Phillips calls rant control. You know? So.
Right. Well, also I want to mentioned that Jorden contracted Lyme disease while working as a park ranger, and it went really undiagnosed for over a year, and at which point he was in raging. The disease was really racking your body.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a serious disease, and I think that most of the public has an idea, sort of vague idea, that it's associated with what are called flu-like symptoms. But that really does not in any way, I think, describe the disease that I unfortunately came to know so intimately and still have. This is, in 80% of late-stage patients, a neurological disease that causes severe problems with your nervous system and can result in such things as heart arrhythmias and heart disease and vision loss and hearing loss and paralysis and seizures and, you know, a lot of very serious problems. And as a park ranger, unfortunately, I was in the high-risk group, and also, unfortunately, doctors here in the foothills at the time that I acquired Lyme disease really didn't know it was here in the way that it is, and really didn't know what to do about it. In spite of the fact that even at that time, the Centers for Disease Control's, the Federal Centers for Disease Control's website showed that California was within the area where Lyme disease was present and could constitute a risk.
Right.
So I got pretty ill, and it changed my life. Eventually I had to retire from rangering, and for a period of time couldn't even write. I developed memory loss and word problems and, you know, a lot of neurological problems. And then eventually sort of was getting better and began to work in earnest on Nature Noir.
And what has been, I know, having tried to contact you, you're a man on the road, a man with a mission.
Yeah.
So what's your life like these days?
It's really a pretty amazing experience. I mean, I don't think I ever thought that you could get it right the first time, you know, that you, this was my first book. I'd done magazine work for, you know, probably 13 years now. But as a first book, I hadn't, of course, expected to see this book do as well as it has. And my life has been a little bit like when I was fighting fires for the Forest Service in the falls in the Northern Rockies back in the late 70s and early 80s. You know, they'd put you on a plane someplace and you'd be flown to some other place, and they'd drive you in, you know, National Guard trucks to a National Guard armory where you'd be given showers, and then they'd drive you to a restaurant and get fed, and then they'd drive you in vans out in the middle of a smoky forest and dump you in the flames, and you'd be out there in a place you'd never been for a couple of days with a sort of photocopied, blurred map, and then they'd come and pick you up and put you back on an airplane and fly you to another state. And after a period of time, you really didn't know where you were and where you'd been, and I've been living that sort of life, so I'm really eager to come and live back here in Nevada County.
Right, rejoin your family.
Yeah.
Jorden has a wife, 2 young children, and a life here as well as on the road.
What's wonderful, you know, is to live in a place that so much recommends itself to be written about. I mean, I think what I've, you know, had the chance to see, and I've been to Arizona and Montana and Wyoming and Colorado and Oregon and Washington and New York and so on on the book tour. And more, I just really appreciate the Sierra and feel so lucky to be able to live here in this community in Nevada County.
Well, I look forward to many more stories and adventures coming forth. But in our talks, we also mentioned wanting to support an effort that's taking place locally.
Yeah, I've got this benefit reading and book signing coming up in Grass Valley on June 28th at 7 p.m. in the evening at the Center for the Arts, which is right on West Main Street in downtown Grass Valley. And the event is a benefit for and sponsored by the Friends of Sugarloaf. Now, Sugarloaf Mountain is this hill that forms the backdrop for Nevada City. You can see that in this photo, how Nevada City is nestled in the hollow beneath this wonderful hill called Sugarloaf Mountain. And off to the right, just out of the photo, is the Manzanita Diggins, that sort of area of hoodoos and cliffs, just outside of town as you drive up Highway 20 on your left. And a lot of us here in town have been concerned because we've seen a number of proposals come up now for building, for example, an elaborate hotel complex on the hill or a 70-acre housing development. And you know, Nevada City is often described as one of the best preserved gold rush towns in the whole state. And I think it's really sort of a fundamental of our tourist industry that the town is as great as it still is. But I think it's great because because it's a little town nestled in mountains and not in the middle of a thing that looks like Citrus Heights. So a lot of us are really interested now in purchasing this area as a green belt for Nevada City. It's true now all over California and other places that unless you actually go out and save a place, that it will eventually turn into something else. You can't rely on a place being as it is just because it's there now. And luckily, the city has come into, through a grant, almost $500,000. So we don't have that much farther to go to where we might be in a position to save this hilltop for our children and their children.
So there actually is an organization called Friends of Sugarloaf.
Friends of Sugarloaf. It's a Nevada City organization of local people.
And
what we're doing on the 28th is I'm going to do a reading of Nature Noir. I'll read some sections from the book, I'll talk about the book, and I'll answer questions from the audience. And then the bookseller is also a sponsor. It's a bookstore in Grass Valley, and they're going to come over and sell books for people that don't have them, and I'll be happy to sign them. And it's free admission. However, if somebody wants to make a donation, then we're more than happy to add it to this growing fund to save the hill above Nevada City.
Well, I would hope that people would make donations as just as a routine matter, because it is our own local area. It will, if we lose it, it's gone.
That's right.
In terms of Sugarloaf.
I just think of this as a continuation of my work as a park ranger. I mean, in some way, I've done several benefits now in the course of this book tour, and this book, even a book about rangers, can have a protective effect on the world if you employ it in some way to do that. And so this benefit that we're doing for Sugarloaf is just like my work as a ranger, I think.
There is a website now being listed. Maybe you can bring it up again. There's a website that lists not only Jordan's book, but also his coming talk at the Center for the Arts. By the way, that's 341 Main Street, right near the Holbrook Hotel in Grass Valley. And what night is it that you're doing it?
That's a Tuesday night, and it's June 28th at 7 p.m. Admission is free. And also, I mean, even if you don't make a donation to Friends of Sugarloaf, I encourage people to come out. I keep getting calls from people saying, when are you going to do another local reading? We did one right at the beginning of the book tour, and it's been a while, and there were some people who missed it. So I'd love to see my friends there, and anybody who's interested in the book and wants to talk to me about it. And Sugarloaf, people are interested in that issue.
Has there been a price mentioned at which a goal that we are working towards?
No, negotiations with the owners haven't progressed that far. But the point is that by the time such negotiations become serious, we want to be in a place where we actually have something to negotiate with. And so that's the idea of this effort. And more than anything, I think the other thing that we're doing is just to get the word out. I think that we tend to take for granted those things that are still green, this beautiful backdrop to Nevada City, which we just see because it's always been there. And you assume because it's there, it will be there. But our experience here in California has been, very different than that. As a kid, I remember that the Sierra was a pretty empty place, really. And these counties on the west side of the Sierra are now the fastest growing counties in the state. I don't think I could have imagined that as a kid when you drove up in this sort of depressed region of the foothills. And even when I first lived in the foothills in 1971 and 72, I mean, it was a pretty rundown situation here. And so I think that we really have to be intentional about what we want to save now, because anything we don't intentionally save, it's going to get built up. here in the western part of these counties.
True. We can see the pace of growth.
It's amazing.
It's not slowing down.
No, it isn't.
We can, just like the pace of life, we can anticipate
right.
things will get faster.
Yeah.
There is a number that you can call if you are interested in supporting Friends of Sugarloaf. The number is 265-5433. 265-5433. That will put you in touch with the organization, and they can use all the help they can get in terms of generating support funds and local interest. So at this point, Jorden, I look forward to more interviews, more books, certainly ways in which we can better support the local environment. And I want to thank you very much for your efforts. This is not, you're not lining your own pockets here. You're really helping out our local, just the local natural environment. And
well, you know, I could say the same for you, Lew. This, you know, how wonderful it is that Nevada County has its own TV station, you know, for local content. And things that are of interest to Nevada Countyans, and I'm always amazed at how many people watch NCTV. I don't actually have cable and haven't for I think 13 years, so I don't know what's on TV. But I can't tell you the number of people that tell me that they watch your channel. So I think that's just great, and thank you for your efforts.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate it. I like the plug, and I'd like to thank viewers. You'll be seeing a lot of this program because it's an important one, and please tune in to NCTV again. Thanks for your interest.